Hi, KIB parents. Welcome to week 8 and the final week of the Maximize Mental Health Care webinar series. Today, we are focusing on extra support and help and learning when and how to escalate when you suspect there is a mental illness disorder or otherwise in your children. To start with, a trigger warning that we will be covering mental illness and suicide in today's session. If you do find this harmful, distressing, or traumatizing, please feel free to stop the recording at any point and reach out for support. A reminder of the 8 webinar series topics that we have already covered, and today we are focusing on extra support and help. So to start with, as an introduction, what will we be learning about today? What is extra support and help, and why should you seek it? When should you escalate to obtain extra support and help? And how do you escalate? And finally, where can you escalate to? So an outline of what today looks like. As you can see, what we've just covered. To start with, I would ask that you please scan the QR code and answer a few quick questions for me based on your understanding, which is hopefully developed throughout the course of this webinar series, and to also give you an opportunity to ask any further questions that you may have that you still do not feel have been answered or you would like to know more. So I'll just give you about 20 seconds to do that, please. So firstly, what is extra support and help? Well, we at Maximize define it as the additional resources that may be needed in both the short and long term to assist you as parents in identifying and managing your child or children's mental health and illness. So a few things to call out here is that it's about additional resources, so above and beyond ones that you have in your own skill set or that we've already looked at, and also the short and long term intervention that may be required to do so. So short being what do you need straight away as in terms of extra support and help, and then long term, of course, things that you may need as an ongoing. To start with, additional resources cover 3 particular areas. So firstly, mental health information and literacy. Secondly, assessments and diagnostic tools to help you identify the instance of mental illness and disorders in your children. And thirdly, intervention and treatment strategies and resources which can help you to manage those mental illnesses. Extra support and help obviously also involves short-term and immediate fixes and solutions, but also longer-term ones. So in the short term, we're talking about immediate strategies that you can utilize straight away. So where can you go to in an SOS fashion that can help you solve or try and manage a solution, mental illness concern immediately. This can involve referring your child to self-help strategies, and it typically can be managed by themselves, so that's self-help, but also with your support. If we're looking at extra support and help in the long term, this is where there may need to be additional training and development, which may include for you as parents. This could also mean that children may require also ongoing and more in-depth support. And in the long term, typically it requires more professional support. And we'll explore today both short-term and long-term support and help mechanisms for you. So as you can see here, extra support and help is about getting assistance for you as parents from people like me as psychologists and other mental health care tools and resources to help develop your own understanding and also ability to identify and manage mental illness in your children. So in that respect, it's almost like you're the conjugate to try and assist for your young children to try and give them the tools that they need which are grounded in science and evidence, and you're the mechanism that can help them access that. Ultimately, though, we also want them to be able to seek those resources and self-help strategies themselves. So as much of this is about upskilling you, it's also about trying to help you to provide your children with those strategies as well, so that they can learn to self-manage and develop those skills that they need. So further to this, what is the importance of gaining that extra support and help? Of course, you as parents are already, no doubt, very overloaded. You've already got multiple things running around in your own heads and minds and lives. You also can be over capacity, feel drained at times, and then also in charge of not only your own emotions and regulating those, but also trying to interpret and navigate those of children who are growing up, which can also be, particularly for teenage girls, even more exacerbated around those times like puberty. So appreciating that you're already overloaded, extra support and help is really aiming to help reduce this for you so that you can stick to what you have to do as well outside of being a parent, but also, your own lives and jobs and relationships to help you to recharge and get through what you need to do as in your many different roles beyond just being a parent and beyond just thinking about mental health, which of course is one bit, I'm sure, of a lot of different domains as a parent. The importance, though, for getting extra support and help early is that, as we looked at earlier in previous webinars, early detection and picking it up earlier equals earlier intervention, which equals greater outcomes. And of course, this is not just specific to mental health. This is, of course, as we know, in physical health. The sooner you can find an underlying concern or problem, the sooner you can get help, and the better ultimately the outcomes. So that's really why it's important to seek the extra support and help as soon as you think necessary. Further benefits of seeking extra support and help, not only for yourself but also for your child, are, we just mentioned, timely intervention, identification and intervention can help develop a stronger child-parent relationship between you and your children. It allows you to have better tracking and monitoring of their progress. It allows for necessary adjustments made for education and how that can impact, and their mental illness disorders and challenging emotions can impact their schooling, and how we can help make concessions for that. It therefore helps to not only you, but also them and the school make more informed decisions. And finally, more open communication with key stakeholders. So above and beyond just you as parents, also teachers, counsellors, and any other extra support that you may go to. So to start with, I want to recap some of the support and help strategies that we've already looked at. And I want to go back to how we at Maximinds define success in terms of helping students, and also, of course, you as parents, to identify, manage, and channel mental illness into being mental health and well-being. So firstly, in terms of identifying mental illness as the first stage, you ultimately can't manage what you don't measure. So firstly, it's about identifying what actually is happening. What are the underlying emotions and feelings that are resulting in certain behaviours? So as we've looked at previously, there is a range of tools on Maximinds that can help you with this identification process. We've looked previously, for instance, at the quizzes and also different videos that you can watch. And I want to remind you of some of the ways that we can, and you can access these as well, using the example of anxiety. So in terms of taking quizzes, I want to show you how you, in the first point, can access one of these short-term strategies and extra support and help that we looked at in terms of anxiety. To help remind you of these warning signs and then how to apply them to your child and what to do if they're feeling certain feelings, you can go into features, quizzes, and then take quizzes. And here you'll be able to take a range of quizzes which give you the option of different behavioural symptoms or warning signs and help them apply to your child, and then direct you to the best resources. So a bit of admin to start. And then, as you'll see, you'll be presented with a series of different behavioural symptoms, which you can go through, just learnt about, and how they apply to your child specifically in the last 2 weeks. So I'm just giving you an example of how this could work, given we're talking about anxiety. Then you'd click submit. And here it will give you results based on those behaviours. And here it says it appears your child has been experiencing a bit of anxiety this week. We suggest taking the quiz again in another few weeks, but in the meantime, you can click on managing anxiety. And here you'll be presented with a range of different tools and resources you can use. So we've just taken the quiz. You could watch a video, read some articles, for instance, to learn more about anxiety, and then help them with certain strategies, all 1 minute, quick and easy, and even download activities for them to complete. So further to taking quizzes to help you to identify mental illness as the first means of getting that extra support and help, you can also go on and watch videos to help you to learn about different types of mental illness in order to help identify any similarities and features, symptoms that you may pick up that may be relating to your child. So again, using the example of anxiety, I'll show you one video which may help.
Anxiety is a scary, often overused, and misunderstood concept. With anxiety, your child might feel worry about the same thing over and over, consuming their life and always feeling on edge. Anxiety has physiological impacts affecting our body. They may feel hot and sweaty, jittery and nervous, have trouble breathing, and a quick heart rate. Anxiety is an extreme form of stress occurring over long periods of time. We all need a normal amount of stress to perform, but too much is when we have anxiety. Anxiety can be managed and dealt with, but must be professionally treated. MaxiMinds offers you the tools, learnings, and treatment to help your child deal with anxiety head-on. We can use stress to our advantage. It's all about channeling it in the right way.
So after we are able to identify different types of mental illness and potentially see how they may relate to our children, another way to get that extra support is then, of course, knowing what to do as to how to manage it and how to have that intervention. These 3 particularly, reading articles, learning strategies, and downloading activities, are meant as short-term strategies as well. And I wanted to show you some examples of each of these. So in terms of reading articles, there is a range of different evidence-based articles up on MaxiMinds which can teach you about different types of mental illness, how to manage them, and also provide stories as to what this might look and sound like in a child. And you can look again at how that may help give you some guidance and context to what these different types of mental illnesses are. In addition, there are strategies that you can learn not only what to do to help you to identify mental illness in your children, but also what to do when it comes to managing those. So these sorts of strategies are 1 minute, quick and easy, grounded in psychology and cognitive behavior therapy. So they're all used by psychologists around the world, which help with managing different sorts of thoughts and feelings. So again, for anxiety, here are some examples: deep breathing, sensory engagement, and realistic scenarios. I want to show you again one relating to sensory engagement.
You can encourage your children to incorporate sensory engagement activities into their daily routines to support their mental well-being. They can start this by listing 5 things they can touch, 4 things they can see, 3 things they can hear, 2 things they can smell, and one thing they can taste. Sensory engagement helps children stay present, enhance their experiences, and promotes their mental well-being. You can
So other ways that you can seek extra support when it comes to managing mental illness in your children in terms of a short-term go-to solution are by downloading activities. So we have explored some of these already. Positive emotions, for instance, realistic scenarios, and safety plan, which we'll look at in more detail later. But there are, I think, over 30 other available activities online which can help in that immediate time for management of different mental illnesses and different challenging feelings for your children. And finally, there is the option, of course, to refer to a psychologist if you do need that extra support, and there will be potentially anticipatory longer term intervention needed. And that's where you can book in with a psychologist. That's available through Maximinds, and I will also talk to you shortly about how you can do that. So now that we know what is extra support and some of the immediate things you can do, what about when to actually escalate, and at what point is the right time to reach out for these extra support and help that's available to you? So you may have already tried these sorts of things. So in the first instance, trying the strategies in the short term to not only upskill yourself, but also to help your child. You may have also tried some behavioural management strategies at home to regulate their emotions. You may have also already sought academic support, which may have not led to any noticeable improvement. And finally, you may have already referred your child to different self-help strategies. So when do we go above and beyond those immediate strategies and start looking outside and seeking more professional experience? Ultimately, when you feel maybe the situation is beyond your expertise, your capacity, and your comfort. So, in terms of your expertise, you as parents some of you may be psychologists or trained in mental health, some of you may not. So, for those that aren't, understandably, you may just not know how to deal with this situation that you're noticing in your child, and that's one element when getting extra help may help. Capacity, you may not have not necessarily the time or just the bandwidth and the headspace to be able to navigate this because it does take a lot of consistency with helping children with mental health and time to actually allocate to trying to unpack and do these sorts of strategies over a long period of time. And finally, your comfort level, you may just not be confident in your own ability and want to seek that extra support. In addition to this, it's time to escalate if you have noticed any of these three things, and we'll go through each of them. So firstly, the warning signs, whether they be general to mental illness or specific according to specific mental disorders, and we'll remind you of those. Secondly, if you've noticed a changed behaviour, so they have changed previously to how they were to now, an atypical behaviour, which is unlike what would be expected of a child at that age and stage, and finally having that impact not only at home and at school. And then thirdly, marked distress, at least over a 2-week minimum period, and or having a safety risk to them. So to go through each of them and remind you of what we've already explored and some additional things, starting with general warning signs. We've gone over these a few times, but a reminder to summarize things you're looking out for in your children are mood changes, concentration, energy, social, sleep disturbances, eating and exercise changes, particularly in the extreme, physical changes or illnesses, risk-taking behaviours, feeling more or particularly overwhelmed, symptoms relating to their esteem and motivation. So these are at a high level. And then, of course, in terms of specific warning signs related to the top 5 mental disorders. So I'll just let you read those to remind and refresh yourself on those relating to anxiety, depression, ADHD, conduct disorder, and eating disorder. So, in addition to those general and specific warning signs, you're also wanting to look out for changed behavior, which is different patterns of behavior or personalities than prior. So, perhaps your child was really interested in netball last year or even last month and suddenly don't want to have anything to do with it. Atypical, it's different to peers in their same age and stage. So, what would be expected of, for instance, their siblings, or how were they behaving or reacting emotionally at their same age, or perhaps cousins at the same age, or even peers amongst their friendship groups that you can notice a difference between them. And thirdly, of course, impact. So, causing clinically significant distress. So, basically, it impairs and impacts both home and or school. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, this slide is if there is noticeable high level of distress. So high level would be quite subjective, but markedly different to how you would expect them normally to behave or how they normally do behave, and causing them quite a lot of tension, worry, anxiety, an extreme amount of those feelings that they perhaps would mark onto certain mental illness disorders. Of course, the distress would vary depending on which one. Secondly, it would have to be for a duration of at least 2 weeks in order to qualify at a minimum as a mental illness disorder. So you're looking out for at least that 2 week period. And thirdly, and finally, and most importantly, if there is a safety risk to them. So if you do believe they're in danger, suicidal ideation is the thoughts associated with suicide, fixations on death, or any indication of self harming. In all those instances, particularly that last one, that is when you must escalate. So, how do you escalate? And what do you do if we know what we are looking out for? Now we know when to escalate, but actually, how do you do that? I wanted to remind you of this statistic we've looked at in previous webinars. So, do teenagers speak to someone when they have a personal or emotional problem? This is averaged across all of the high school years. So, previously we did look at years 7 to 9 and then 10 to 12, but on average, about 3 out of 5, or 60%, of teenagers will speak to someone when they have an emotional problem. So that's at least above average. More than not are actually reaching out, which is great. So for those 60% that will reach out, and this is not necessarily to say they will reach out to you, but they may speak to a friend or someone else or a trusted adult particularly. The first instance would be a friend, but assuming they do come to you and they're communicating with you, for those 3 and 5 that do reach out, we've got quite clear steps we've already looked at in the week 5 Strong Connections webinar, which is the importance of validating what they're saying, listening, and then acting. And I just want to remind you again today what that actually looks like, so you do have a practical way to go away if they do ever come to you and reveal their concerns. Particularly girls and teenage girls would be more likely to come to parents as well. So that's promising. So to remind you of an example, they may come to you and say they've got no friends and everyone keeps leaving them out, and they want to move schools. So in terms of the 3 stages, first is, of course, to validate. So saying something like, I'm sorry, feeling like you have no friends would understandably be very upsetting. As you'll see here, validation involves paraphrasing back what they've said, things like no friends, and it's upsetting, and inferring that from potentially their body language. It's not going straight into the concerning bits, which we will cover here. So other phrases might be being excluded never feels nice. Of course, that would make you feel sad. So unhelpful statements here, which is sometimes the thing that we want to react to first, which is move schools and the concern with that, or dismissing what they're saying and saying, no, you've got plenty of friends, don't worry about it. So most importantly is to validate so they feel heard. Secondly, is to listen. So saying something like, I'm here for you. Can you tell me more about what's been happening at school? Other things you could say would be, let's sit down and talk about this. Why do you think moving schools would help? So actually sounding out what from their perspective and their worldview makes sense and why they do think that's a good option. Unhelpful statements are saying you want to move schools at the same age and friends will all come and go. That not only makes them feel like it's not a them problem, it's more like, oh yeah, that's everyone happens, that happens to everyone, and almost minimizes what they're trying to tell you. And the same thing with friends will come and go. It makes them feel like what they've just shared with you is not really worthwhile and not really worth being upset about, when of course it's something that they've come to you in confidence. So something to validate and reassure them that it is okay. So thirdly is acting. So where shall we go? Where shall we go to from here, for instance? So other things you could say would be, what do you think you can do about this and how can I help you? Unhelpful statements. Let me speak to the school about this. So problem solving on their behalf, not ideal, and I'll book you in with a psychologist. So acting really is about responding to them. They've come to you, try and help them problem solve themselves and see what your role is from their perspective. So if we go back to those that do and do not speak to someone, we've obviously now covered what happens if they come to you, but what happens if they don't? And we've already looked at things like being hyper observant, attending to non-verbal cues to try and infer what they may be thinking and feeling, attending to their expressions, body gestures, and actions and movements. That is just as telling, and this can also help you to start guiding a conversation. So from that perspective, when they haven't come to you, but you do want to approach them, 3 stages to guide a healthy conversation to help escalate this concern that you have. So firstly, approaching them. Secondly, communicating. And thirdly, acting. So approaching is about finding a time and place when you won't be interrupted and that you can both have that time to actually properly talk about it. Communicating, so objectively sharing what you've noticed in terms of warning signs. And I've said here using observed behaviours. So when we use observed behaviours that you've noticed, that can help to remove the subjectivity and the calling out and generalizing. By using observed behaviours, you can just reflect on what you've witnessed and seen. So it removes the defensiveness that can come sometimes with communicating with teenagers about these sorts of things. And thirdly, act. So identify if the issue again can be managed or requires outside help and proceed accordingly. So in terms of the first stage of approach, this could be saying something like, I wanted to have a quick chat to you. Do you have some time one night after school this week? Other things you could say would be, can we have a chat when you're free? Are you open to having a chat or with me? This invites the opportunity for discussion without making it like it's a must have or do with them. It means that they feel more empowered to say yes and feel like they've got some of the control, which of course, as we've looked at, is very good for mental health and well-being when teenagers and people generally feel like they're in control. So gently approaching the conversation and sitting down with them is the best way to get for them to be most receptive. Unhelpful statements, saying things like, I urgently need to speak to you. Of course, this could exacerbate any initial or underlying worries and tendencies they may have to be having mental illness or some form of emotional challenge, and creating a sense of urgency and hurry would potentially, make it worse. And also saying something like, we need to have a discussion about your grades. Of course, I'm sure you can all probably understand as parents, if you did say something like that, you'll be met with probably defensiveness, aggression, shut down, shut the room, shut the door in the room, don't want to talk about it. So the importance of having approach as a whole initial stage is really for that transition period so that they can get used to the idea that they're going to have to communicate with you about something. And it just helps ease that process and reduces some of that initial tension and barriers towards having a conversation. So, secondly, is to communicate. So, saying something like, I've noticed you've been particularly flat at the moment and just want to make sure you're okay. A note here, it's about what you've noticed. So, those observed behaviours, being flat, for instance, and you're coming from a place of concern. As you'll see, there's no reference here to grades, despite the fact that that may be the underlying reason why you want to have this conversation. But your concern right now will come through to them, and that will at least allow for an initial open conversation without that defensiveness. So, other phrases could be, how are you feeling at the moment? Is there anything particular weighing on your mind? So these open questions will allow for the discussion to commence and be more receptive, most likely, to this. Unhelpful statements, which can often be the easier thing to say, which doesn't necessarily result in a great outcome, is things like, why are you always so moody at the moment? What's wrong with you? You're so snappy. And particularly with teenagers, that may be the case, but that won't get you very far in terms of actually unpacking what's going on and then working out whether there is a problem that we need to address. So really gently, open-ended questions, not attacking, not blaming, ascribing any key words to them, even though we know that, for instance, being flat or feeling down or even anxious for teenagers would appear in terms of things like moodiness and irritability, but really trying to use language which does not make it seem like it's an attack, and it's more to really understand from their perspective. And thirdly, act. So this would be where we actually get towards the escalation stage, if that's something that the child wants to do and or you think is appropriate based on those things that we've looked at before, when it is important for you to intervene. But at least in this situation, saying something like, well, what can I help you to do to support you? Other things you might want to say are, how can I help? Would you like to speak to someone? You'll see that all of these questions are quite open-ended. It's trying to invite conversation and a discussion and allowing those pauses to encourage them to contribute and come up with some sort of response. Even after a while, they will respond at some stage, even if you leave those silences, particularly when you're asking them questions which are not necessarily attacking or directing to blame and pointing fingers. So unhelpful statements again would be, you should explain to your friends why you're so moody, so telling them what to do, and I will book you in with a psychologist. So taking their problem into your own hands also is not going to necessarily result in a good outcome. As mentioned though, when we do have times when you do think it's important to escalate, that is also important for you to do in the instance where you do think they're in a danger, and that could be something that would be beneficial to them. It is more about, though, getting them to consider that possibility for themselves, and you're better to put those ideas in their head to let them think and reflect about it, rather than taking the steps in that moment to say, well, this is what I'm going to do immediately. So encouraging self-autonomy, empowerment for them is really important, at least in the first instance, before we go to the next stage of where to escalate. So when we talk about where to escalate, by this stage, you are obviously of the mind that it is time to do something about what you've heard or seen in your child, and you think that it is necessary to reach out and get that extra support and help. So the good news is there are many resources available as to where to go next. So these start at school with KRB, but there's also options as well available outside of school when it comes to escalation. So Kincoppal Rose Bay has an excellent, as we've seen, wellbeing framework, the Self Plus. And as part of that and how they live that and implement that, it is, of course, by having various teams that are layers almost to protect children when it comes to their mental health and wellbeing. So this starts with the year coordinators, and they're the first point of call for any wellbeing related matters. So if you ever have any concerns with those sorts of things, they are the best people to reach out to. They then may involve the counselling team if required. And you are also able to book in with the counselling team for your children or suggest that they go and speak to the counselling team. And there's different psychologists available for different year levels, specialising in their each age level. Above and beyond that, there's also heads of wellbeing at Kincoppal, and then pastoral team who looks at overall the this structure and manages all of each of these, and that's headed by Carrie Scanlon. So in terms of Escalate Kincoppal, there's plenty of people to reach out to there if you do want to raise any concerns that you've had. Also collaborate and liaise with year coordinators, for instance, or even teachers to see whether they are also experiencing similar sorts of behaviours or emotional challenges that you may be finding at home, and definitely suggest having oversight as to what's going on at school. As we've looked at, that clinically significant distress does mean that we need to have evidence of those challenging emotions and behaviours both at home and at school. So it's important for a holistic framework and oversight to happen for in the interest of your child. So specifically in terms of the counselling team, the counselling team at KRB assesses students with specific needs. They work with the teachers and specialist staff at the school. They also help you, of course, to understand and manage your child's learning and mental health needs. And also they liaise with external agencies and other mental health professionals outside, so such as different psychology practices like Maximinds or otherwise, but also have oversight in different reports from doctors and psychiatrists if necessary, and if you're comfortable with that, to help with the oversight and working together holistically and collaboratively. As mentioned, that's important in order to help with the information gathering to understand more about what's happening both at home and at school. Are there any similarities and differences? And of course, to have the collaborative insight can allow for a richer understanding what's actually going on. And the sooner that we do get to that initial diagnosis, the better in terms of management, and both at home, but also at school in terms of having different educational provisions and things like that to help them. So beyond escalating at school and speaking to KRB, there are many different options available to you outside as well. So this is when you may want to seek more independent guidance, for instance, and desire to separate the personal and academic for your child. And of course, having the external inputs from, say, doctors or you as parents that have that pre-existing knowledge of what's going on. So just to give you a few examples, the reason actually we set up Maximinds was because there was a lot of, or one of the reasons, there was a lot of concern around children not wanting to actually go necessarily just to the school counselling team because of fear of, unfortunately, stigma. And there's still the perception that, of course, if the teachers know what's going on, then their friend's going to find out, and then they're going to be considered ostracized. And when we did speak to one particular little girl, she didn't want to be, quote unquote, her words was a loser for going to the school counsellor. So, of course, that is unfortunately still very real, that seeking external support is sometimes preferable, and that desire to separate the personal academic is also very real, as we may know in our own, say, professional lives as you as parents, that sometimes you don't want to go through the workplace, EAP, you'd rather go to your own independent psychology treatment to get that help. And frankly, whichever way you want to get help, I think that's good to get the help, as long as you do pursue. That's the most important thing ultimately. So King Couples, the counselling team, is there and available. But there's also added resources. As you can see, also things like Lifeline, Kids Helpline, they are immediate and available and accessible 24/7. Same with Maximize, and I think that's probably another benefit of mentioning with the external, is that it is a 24/7 offering, and these places do have, including Lifeline and Kids Helpline, there is the ability to go to those places above and beyond the 9 to 3 or 8 to 3 school time and school terms, particularly over holidays, on the weekends, over the long summer break. That's when these places, including Maximize, have a big uptake. So just to keep in mind as another resource if you need that in terms of escalating. So booking a psychologist, and I just did want to differentiate for you the difference between a psychologist and psychiatrist. I'm sure most of you are aware of it, but sometimes I do get the question. So a psychologist we've done 6 years of training at a minimum to specialise more in the behavioural management of mental illness. As you can see, it's more about, from these things we've looked at, the strategies and techniques you can do to amend behaviour and how that can help impact the behaviour, thought, and feeling loop. You can book a psychologist directly, typically through most practices. Most take private patients, or you can also go through your GP or doctor, who can refer you with a mental health care plan, and that entitles you to Medicare rebates for psychology sessions. There's a range of rebates available, for instance, on Maximize, but I'm sure other psychology practices also have that for you. If you do need to book in a psychologist, ideally the mental health care plan will just give you that benefit of liaising with your doctor, but also give you the financial rebate from the government. The other type of mental health care specialist, which are more advanced in terms of their training, is of course a psychiatrist, and they've done a medical degree. So they deal typically with more complex cases, particularly, and the difference is that they also prescribe medication. So they're the ones to go to sometimes after seeing a psychologist, and this is what typically happens if, for instance, I as a psychologist or anyone at Maximize, we are beyond our scope of thinking we need to now get some sort of additional medication involved, for instance, for ADHD, or if anxiety is not responding necessarily to just behavioural treatments. This is when we would refer to a child psychiatrist as well to supplement, but typically still all work together. So psychiatrists particularly do the medication, and psychologists more do the talk therapy, as some people call it, or the behavioural interventions, which is that behavioural change that has to happen alongside typically just medication. So that's the difference. And you could also go and book a psychiatrist, typically, in particular, a child or adolescent psychiatrist. Pediatricians can also refer you to psychiatrists as well. So here's a summary again for you in terms of what is available at Maximize. We've looked at many of these things, including strategies, quizzes, articles, videos, activities, and of course, psychologists. It's 24/7 access, real-time support, evidence-based tools and resources, and can help you at home whenever. Of course, emergency contacts are there for you, given we're talking about escalation and when you do need to escalate. this is where you want to go to first in the event where there is an immediate risk or danger to your child, of course. And finally, I did just want to show you a couple of further Maximine's tools in terms of the escalation process. The safety plan is something that I think is most important, given we're talking about when you escalate is, of course, when there is a danger or a potential threat to the safety of your children. This is a plan that's been developed by Beyond Blue, and we use it as psychologists for those clients and children that particularly have things like depression or are in a not necessarily good place themselves. But I do think at a high level and overall, always good for children at least to have this pen to paper, and I'll show you what this involves.
As parents, you have a responsibility to ensure the safety and well-being of your children. You can start by introducing the concept of a safety plan and collaborating with them to create an individualized safety plan that they can refer to when they're not feeling their best. A safety plan involves identifying their warning signs, which are indicators that they're not doing so well. Then ask them to consider their reasons to live, the things that bring them joy and purpose. And then determine a safe space, a physical or mental place where they feel secure and calm. Then ask them to list activities, people, places, or things that they can connect with. Then finally, ask them to identify someone they can reach out to have a chat whenever they're feeling down. By having a safety plan in place, we can provide children with tools to navigate difficult moments and support their mental well-being. As parents,
and here is one of those downloadable activities that you can access on Maximine's, and of course screenshot to save and print and give to your children as a third medium to almost start or have that initial conversation if they are presenting signs such as feeling down or even anxious. Just give them something like this as a visual cue and reminder that they can then keep to have on hand. I don't think enough children think about these sorts of things, particularly growing up now. It's not as obvious for them to think about their safe places and things they like to do and people they actually have. There's a big emphasis more on what they don't have and what other people have that they don't have, or things like that. So I think this is really good, just a one-pager tool generally to help with that escalation process for you when communicating, but also for them to have as a final important tool, if I can leave you with that. And of course, another final resource related to today's booking in with a psychologist. If you would like to, you can make an appointment, and there are many facts and frequently asked questions there if you would like to understand more about what that process involves, more above and beyond what we spoke about today. So to summarise, what did we hopefully learn today? Extra support and help refers to additional resources that may be needed in the short and long term to assist in identifying and managing your child's mental health and illness. You should seek extra support and help to reduce being overloaded, to help ensure early detection in your children and intervention of mental illness for them. You should escalate when you feel the situation is beyond your expertise, capacity and or comfort level, and or when you notice those warning signs, changed behaviours, atypical behaviours, clinically significant distress in your child for at least a 2-week period, and or if your child is, of course, most importantly, in danger. Escalate by validating, listening and acting when your child raises concerns with you, and by approaching, communicating and acting to raise concerns with your child. You can escalate at KRB through the year coordinator or the counselling team, or externally via a range of professional online 24/7 services such as Maximine's. Resources, hopefully you have had plenty from today, but a final reminder, here are your emergency contacts if you need them. Maximine's is available for you. And here are my contact details for one last time. If you do have any further questions or comments, If you would like any additional support, please do reach out. My details are there, and you can also scan the QR code. Thank you all KRB parents for an excellent 8 weeks, and I hope it's been hugely beneficial for you. I look forward to speaking to you again down the track.